Thomas was a young and energetic ranger who had recently started working in a national park. His passion for nature and animals had shown itself in his childhood, and he had always dreamed of having such a job. Every day, Thomas eagerly awaited new adventures and the chance to help the park's inhabitants. The national park where Thomas worked was home to many animal species, but it was especially known for its population of African lions. There were about 30 lions in the park, and Thomas felt a special responsibility for their health and well-being. One early morning, Thomas set off in his jeep to patrol the park's territory. The sun was just beginning to rise over the horizon, painting the sky in soft pink and orange hues. The air was fresh and cool, filled with the scent of blooming plants. Thomas's route passed through a rocky area where one of the lion prides lived. These rocks were the perfect place for the lions, providing shelter, shaded resting spots, and lookout points for hunting. As Thomas approached the rocks, he noticed a group of young lions playing on the edge of a cliff. Their carefree jumps and chases made the ranger smile, but also feel worried. He knew how dangerous this place could be, especially for inexperienced animals. Suddenly, Thomas saw part of the rock beginning to crumble under the paws of the playful lions. His heart raced as he realized the impending danger. He hoped the adult lions would call the cubs away from the edge in time. One of the older lions, noticing the danger, stood up and began to roar loudly, calling the young ones to move away from the edge. However, the playful cubs, engrossed in their fun, did not immediately respond to the warning. Seeing his calls being ignored, the older lion decisively moved toward the cubs. His mighty roar finally caught their attention, and they began to retreat from the dangerous edge. But it was already too late. The movement of the heavy adult lion was the final straw for the unstable cliff edge. A large piece of rock broke off, taking one of the young lions with it. Thomas watched in horror as the lion slipped off the cliff. Fortunately, the animal managed to catch itself on a rock ledge with its claws, but its position was extremely precarious. Without help, the lion would not be able to hold on for long. Wasting no time, Thomas grabbed his radio and called for backup. He quickly explained the situation and requested immediate assistance. The ranger knew they had to act quickly, or the lion would fall to the rocks below. Making a decision, Thomas immediately drove toward the cliff in his jeep. He needed to drive the other lions away to safely carry out the rescue operation. By honking loudly and maneuvering the jeep, Thomas hoped that the noise and movement would scare the predators away. To his relief, the tactic worked. The pride began to retreat, clearing the area around the cliff. Once the last lion disappeared from view, Thomas jumped out of the vehicle and ran to the edge of the cliff. Looking over the edge, he saw the lion desperately clinging to the rock. The animal made pitiful sounds, its claws slipping on the stone. Thomas understood that he only had a few minutes before the lion's strength would give out. Quickly returning to the jeep, Thomas took out strong ropes from the trunk. He started unrolling them, figuring out how best to tie the lion to pull it up. At that moment, he heard the long-awaited sound of approaching jeeps. His colleagues had arrived to help. Wasting no time, the rangers immediately got to work, following Thomas' instructions. Together, they created a system of ropes and began lowering one end down to the stranded lion. Thomas, as the initiator of the rescue operation, took on the most dangerous part, tying the lion with ropes. Carefully approaching the edge of the cliff, Thomas began to lower the rope. The lion seemed to understand that people were trying to help and did not show any aggression. Its amber eyes were full of fear and hope. With great difficulty, Thomas managed to loop the rope around the lion's body. The animal instinctively jerked, almost falling into the abyss, but Thomas spoke to it soothingly. Amazingly, the lion seemed to understand and calmed down, allowing him to finish tying the rope. When the lion was securely fastened, Thomas gave the signal to the other rangers to start lifting. It was a difficult task. The weight of the adult lion was immense, and the unstable surface of the cliff made the work even harder. The rangers pulled with all their might, slowly lifting the lion up. Thomas encouraged his colleagues and the lion, knowing that the animal's life depended on their coordinated efforts. Every inch was hard-won, but they did not give up. Finally, after several grueling minutes, the lion's face appeared over the edge of the cliff. A few more pulls, and the animal was on solid ground. Exhausted but alive, the lion lay breathing heavily on the grass. The rangers stepped back, giving the lion more space, all except Thomas. The young man, driven by some inner impulse, stayed close to the animal. He slowly knelt beside the lion, looking directly into its eyes. In that moment, a spark of understanding seemed to pass between the man and the beast. The lion showed no aggression, but looked at Thomas with something resembling gratitude. The ranger carefully began removing the ropes, and the lion allowed him to do so without moving from its spot. When the last rope was removed, the lion slowly rose to its feet. It looked at Thomas one more time, gave a quiet roar that sounded more like a purr, and slowly walked away toward its pride. The rangers watched this scene in awe, amazed by the bond that had formed between the man and the wild animal. After this incident, life in the park returned to normal. Thomas continued his work but often thought about the rescued lion. He hoped to see it up close again, but knew the chances were slim. Several months passed. The monsoon season arrived, a time the rangers always awaited with anxiety. Heavy rains brought the threat of floods and landslides, which could seriously harm the park's inhabitants. One morning, during an especially heavy downpour, Thomas was patrolling his section. Visibility was poor, and the Jeep's wipers struggled to keep up with the streams of water on the windshield. The ranger moved slowly, carefully scanning the surroundings for animals in distress. Suddenly, Thomas noticed a large fallen tree ahead. Deciding to check it out, he stopped the Jeep and stepped out into the pouring rain. Pulling the hood of his jacket over his head, he headed toward the tree. Thinking about how many small animals might have lost their homes because of its fall, Thomas was so engrossed in his thoughts that he didn't immediately hear the growing roar. When he finally noticed it, it was too late. Turning around, the ranger saw a massive wall of mud and debris rushing toward him. An enormous landslide was coming straight at him. Panicked, Thomas tried to run back to the Jeep, but quickly realized he wouldn't make it. The only possible shelter was the fallen tree. The ranger dashed toward it and, climbing as high as he could, clung tightly to the trunk with his arms and legs. Moments later, the wave of mud hit Thomas. He felt the powerful force trying to rip him away from the tree. He clung to the trunk with all his might, praying to withstand the onslaught of the elements. When the first wave subsided, Thomas found himself buried under a thick layer of mud and debris. Fortunately, a small pocket of air had formed around his face, allowing him to breathe. But he knew his situation was still extremely dangerous. Thomas tried to move but found himself almost completely immobilized. The dense layer of mud restrained his movements. He tried to stay calm, knowing that panic would only make things worse. Time passed, and Thomas began to worry. He knew his colleagues would be busy dealing with the landslide's aftermath throughout the park. How long would it take before someone noticed his absence and started looking for him? Suddenly, Thomas heard a noise above him. Through a small gap, he saw movement and thought he glimpsed a flash of sand-colored fur. But he decided it was just his imagination. How could a lion be here? The noise grew louder, and Thomas felt something heavy moving over the mud directly above him. He held his breath, unsure of what to expect. Could it be another landslide, which would finally bury him completely? But instead of more mud, Thomas felt the pressure on his body beginning to lessen. Someone or something was clearing the debris right above him. He heard a roar that sent shivers down his spine, and then human voices. Thomas tried to shout, but his voice was too weak. However, the rescuers seemed to know where to look for him. Soon, the ranger saw light and was able to take a deep breath of fresh air. When Thomas was finally pulled out from under the rubble, he saw an astonishing sight. Standing next to the group of rangers was a huge lion, covered in mud. It was the very same lion Thomas had saved on the cliff several months ago. It turned out that the lion had somehow found the spot where Thomas was buried and began digging. Its behavior had attracted the attention of other rangers, who rushed to help. Thomas couldn't believe such a miraculous rescue. The lion he had once helped had now repaid him in kind. It was an incredible display of gratitude, and perhaps even the beginning of a friendship between man and wild animal. After this incident, the lion no longer avoided people in the park. Thomas often saw it during his patrols, and each time there was a silent exchange of glances, full of mutual respect and understanding. This amazing story of mutual help between a man and a lion quickly spread throughout the park and far beyond. It became an example of how kindness and compassion can overcome any boundaries, even between different species. Many people, hearing this story, were deeply touched and began to look at relationships between humans and wild animals in a new way.